Ladies and gentlemen, today's speakers are Brigadier-General Aitchison, Deputy Commanding General of Operations for United States Army, Alaska. Brigadier-General Retired MP Jorgensen, and Mr. Dusty Finley, USAG Deputy Chief of Staff. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dusty Finley.
Good morning. In 1989, I had the opportunity to serve, as did several other individuals who are gathered with us today, in the armed forces that participated in a series of exercises and operations, the principal one being in January of 1989, known as Grim Frost. This was a joint training exercise involving nearly 26,000 personnel from all the services of the U.S. military in conjunction with representatives from the Canadian military. Occurred predominantly throughout the last 2 weeks of January 1989 and into the first week of February. A characteristic of that time frame that colored the exercise was extreme cold weather operating conditions. For the last 2 weeks of January, temperatures averaged -50 or below throughout most of mainland Alaska, from the North Slope all the way down to Anchorage area out west as far as McGrath. The other prevailing characteristic that occurred during this time frame was a high pressure system that settled in over interior Alaska that was superimposed by another high pressure system that resulted in atmospheric conditions under which most aircraft could not properly set their altimeters. During as we approached the end of the exercise, there was going to be a culminating event, what was called a force-on-force exercise, in which a large number of soldiers were going to congregate in the Fairbanks area, and it was going to be led off by an airborne operation that was going to be conducted by the Canadian Armed Forces. An advanced detachment aircraft attempted to land at Airfield here at Fort Wainwright on Sunday night about 9 o'clock at night on the 29th of January, landed in very obscure conditions, struck a berm on the east end of the runway. The plane laterally turned around and crashed tail first on the front leading edge of the runway. It just happened to be passing over a series of M113 armored personnel carriers which were en route to pick up soldiers that were due to arrive at the airfield operations shortly thereafter. The commander of those M113s boarded a left flank, took the vehicles out onto the active runway, secured the crash site, and began administering first aid. They also served as guides for follow-on medical evacuation personnel who came on site. The airfield operating control tower was unaware that the plane had actually crashed, nor was it aware of its location on the airfield, until one of the Canadian soldiers walked over to a nearby barracks complex and calls were made to the airfield ops. It was after that time frame that medical personnel from both Fort Wainwright and from the surrounding communities were able to converge on the crash site and render assistance. Unfortunately, there were 8 deceased Canadians on site and 1 severely injured that later died in care in downtown Fairbanks. Immediately after the crash, General McInerney, who was the commander of Joint Task Force Alaska, the overall commander for the exercise, throttled back the overall conduct of the exercise, eliminated most of the force-on-force operations, and it took over a week to get everybody redeployed back to home stations due to the severe weather conditions that were existing at the time. In the after-action reports that were prepared following Grim Frost 89, it was noted that of the 26,000 service personnel who participated, over 480 sustained injuries, 250 were directly attributable to cold weather casualties, and 88 had 1 degree or another of frostbite, and unfortunately 9 deceased soldiers, all out of the Canadian Armed Forces. One of the challenges we have here in Alaska in this type of operating environment has to do with communications. And to say the least, the immediate circumstances surrounding or following the crash of the Canadian C-130 were very confused, and it was through the coordination, both military and civilian, we were able to finally gather a clear picture of what was happening. But what I would like to offer is, it was the individual initiative on the ground on the part of the service personnel and the medical health service providers that made the difference to eliminate additional loss of life and reduce the pain and suffering. And for that, we can all be grateful. General Aitchison, sir.
Thank you, Dusty. Honorary Consul to the State of Alaska from Canada, Mr. Karen Mathias. Civilian Assistant to the Secretary of the Army, Mr. Tim Jones. General Malone, Major General Jorgensen. Colonel Fisher, Colonel Houghton, Command Sergeant Major Dillingham, Sergeant Major Keynes from the 3rd Canadian Division, Commanders, Sergeant Majors, ladies, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today to mark the 30th anniversary of the crash as just described by Mr. Finley. And thank you for those involved in help organizing today, particularly Scott Irish and Robert Silk from the USAG Protocol Cell and all those directly involved in helping us remember those that were killed in the tragic events of the 29th of January 1989. I'd particularly like to thank Mr. Finley for the introduction of the event and the circumstances. It was a few months ago, I was just coming back off of Arctic Anvil, and he and I were in the hallway having a conversation about this area at Army Airfield, about aircraft crashes. And he asked specifically if I knew of this one. And I said no, but I had just discovered that previously that there was an AWACS crash in the Anchorage area for which there was a memorial. And so we eventually worked out that we were talking about this event of January 29, 1989. I said, you know, I know somebody who was involved in a crash of a C-130 in Alaska who survived, and I said, I wonder if it was the same one. And so I started looking into it, and I called my father who served in the regiment, and I said, is this the same crash that Mike Jorgensen was involved in? He said, yeah, I think so. And so I called some other folks, and then eventually I called General Jorgensen, who I've known pretty much my entire adult life. He was a captain that worked for my father when he was a commandant of our infantry school, and I was a high school student. My brother and I babysat as kids. I was his adjutant when he was a battalion commander, and followed him through his career through crossings of paths. And so when we put one and one together, and I realized that, you know, last month was going to mark the 30th anniversary of that event, I asked him if he would be willing and prepared to make the journey up to Fairbanks to help us remember the 9 that were killed and those that survived, and maybe draw some lessons as we go into this extreme cold weather Arctic operations symposium about how we can better prepare for operations in the Arctic. And he agreed, and I'll introduce him in a minute, and he'll tell his story. I'd like to thank the USAG band for contributing to the ceremony today before I forget. You know, bands add an awful lot of flavor, and in our Army, unfortunately, we've gotten rid of the vast majority of our musical capacity. And so thank you for your contribution to today. It's very much appreciated. Today's ceremony is a hybrid ceremony that tries to reflect some of the traditions of both the U.S. And Canadian armies. And so if it isn't your tradition, it's probably the Canadian one, and if you're Canadian and it isn't yours, it's probably the American one. And if it isn't either of them, then we probably won't know until we have a conversation later and recognize that fact. So there will be, you know, we will play Last Post, which is Canadian will be a reading later that comes from our Remembrance ceremonies, as well as taps from the U.S. tradition. So I hope you appreciate the thought and effort that's gone into this. The team back at USAG headquarters from the ceremonial section, as well as I mentioned, the protocol staff have helped put this together. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Lieutenant Ball and Sergeant Rain, my driver, the assistance that they provided, particularly to General Jorgensen and Colonel Houghton, to get them up from where they were. You know, the 30th anniversary of a tragic event here in Frost 89, on that C-130 there were 18 souls. There's the crew in the cockpit of 6, there was a crew in the back of 3, and there were 9 paratroopers. And of those 18 soldiers and airmen, the crew in the cockpit survived, largely unscathed. And the 12 folks in the back, as Dusty said, 8 were killed outright, 1 died of wounds, which left 3 survivors, all paratroopers. 2 of those survivors, all 3 of those survivors were badly injured. 2 of those were so badly injured they were medically retired shortly following the accident. The third survivor was Captain Mike Jorgensen at the time, who went on to serve up to the rank of Brigadier General, and is here today. Before I introduce him, though, I'd like to thank Karen Mathias for joining us today. She's the, as I mentioned, she's the honorary consul to Alaska from Canada. I probably got that title a bit confused, but she is the senior representative of Canada to Alaska. It's an honorary position. There's no consulate here. But I appreciate the fact that you're taking time out of your days to join us up here and in the sort of unofficial, honorary, official capacity as a representative. I'd like to thank Mike Houghton, who was the commander of the Canadian Airborne Regiment in 1989 for coming up. Mike probably traveled the furthest of just about anybody here, outside of those that might have come from outside of the continental United States. He winters down in Florida, and so he made his way from Orlando. Well, he made his way from the Fort Myers area to Orlando to fly in on Sunday. Mike, I'm really glad you can make it, and I appreciate the effort that it takes to get all the way from there. So I sort of touched a little bit on the connection that Mike Jorgensen and I have. And I've known him an awful long time. I was his adjutant in 3rd Battalion of our regiment back in 99, 2000. And I'll say that so Mike Jorgensen is one of the most compassionate leaders you'll ever know. He connects with soldiers in a way that is rare in any era's army, whether it's today or that of 20 years ago. And as his adjutant, the ops officer and I work very closely together, and the company commanders, and I tell you, there's no commanding officer more frustrating to an adjutant, operations officer, or company commander, because he was so well connected to his soldiers. He knew stuff that we did not, and that's never a good situation. When a commander comes to you and asks you a leading question that you don't know the answer to because he does. And it's because he had the confidence and the trust of his soldiers in ways that, as I said, is very, very rare amongst any commander. He has a very strong background in both tactical operations, having deployed a battle group in 1998-99, but also a very strong training background. So he was the commander of our Combat Training Center, which oversees all of our schools. He was our Director of Army Training, which oversees all of our collective training and individual training policies. And he was a division commander in our Army. Now what would have been a division commander, I guess. He was Commander of Land Forces Western Area, responsible for all the collective training for all the brigades under his command. And so his contribution to the discussion as we think about what the Cold Weather Symposium is supposed to be thinking about, I think is particularly interesting and important. You'll find, I think, that he's both an engaging and thoughtful speaker, and so I'm going to sum up here so that I don't stand between you and the story and contribution you have to make. I encourage you afterwards to bend his ear. As Dusty said, there's an awful lot of people here today who were in the military, who were part of Grimfrost 89, who had a role in post-consummate management, and whether as part of the municipality or the military community. And I know that he and Colonel Houghton would appreciate sharing a word with you. So without further ado, sir, it's a great pleasure to introduce you to this person.
Thanks very much for those very warm words. General Aitchison, thank you very much. I think, again, you're as always much too humble yourself in terms of what you bring to the fight and what you tell others that they bring. You'll pardon me for sticking with my script today, staying close to the script. I'll bet you can guess why. Not only because I don't want to take too long today, but also it is a bit of an emotional return here to Fairbanks and Fort Wainwright, so I hope you'll understand. So, Mr. Jones, General Aitchison, General Malone, Sergeant Major Gillingham, Mr. Mathias, Colonel Fisher, Mr. Finley, Colonel Houghton, Mr. Keynes, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure and an honor for myself and Colonel Houghton. I hope, can you all hear me in the back? All right. It is really an honor and a pleasure for myself and Colonel Houghton to be with you here today. And I just can't express our thanks and gratitude sufficiently for having invited us up here in the first place. Thank you very much for that. Very, very much. Thank you. Thank you for commemorating the 30th anniversary of this crash, and thereby remembering those Canadians who perished here, as well as those who survived the serious injuries. Although they didn't perish as a result of enemy action, their lives were lost while they were serving their country and wearing their country's uniform as well. Their families, I can assure you, will be pleased and grateful to know that their sacrifices have not been forgotten. Thank you for your kindness in bringing us here and allowing us to participate in today's commemoration activities. It means so much to us personally, but from different perspectives. As you'll appreciate, Colonel Houghton will reflect on this event, this tragic crash, from a commander's perspective, while I'll reflect on it a bit from a survivor's perspective. We don't have any great lessons to draw at the end of it, but I just will share a couple of impressions with you today. Both of us will reflect on those 9 Canadian soldiers who lost their lives that day and their families who suffered such a terrible loss. Today, of course, provides me personally with a unique opportunity to thank all of those medical and other professionals, including military personnel who looked after us that night. Thank you in particular to those soldiers who responded to recover the injured and those who have been killed in the crash. A grim and difficult undertaking at any time and any circumstance, but made especially challenging given the darkness and the weather conditions, all of which was so well described by Dusty Finley over here. For me, the medical team at the Bassett Army Community Hospital here at Fort Wainwright was an amazing. Faced with mass casualty scenario, they performed in exemplary fashion, doing their level best to provide life-saving support to those strangers from Canada who had just come out of the darkness. I recall all of the details of that night vividly. I remember fondly all my caregivers, starting with a group of pediatricians and a podiatrist, because in a mass casualty scenario, you realize that all the specialists are in high demand, and I was not number one on that list, as you can guess. And so when I arrived in that first treatment room, and this group of people looking at me, medical professionals, and they said, we're not usually treating people as large as you. And I was kind of hurt. I knew I'd gained a bit of weight, but I thought, that was kind of harsh. And of course, then they were quick to explain that, no, they were pediatricians, and they weren't necessarily working with people like me all the time, but they felt with the podiatrist there, they could fix the open fracture I had in my right ankle. And just a little funny moment there for me, of course. I recall my doctor then, Dr. Major, Dr. John McMillan, who, by the way, still practiced down in Mobile, Alabama, if you need him. But he operated on me twice during my time here. A brilliant fellow who, of course, encouraged me to get back on my feet as quickly as possible before I returned back to Canada on the 6th of February. So I was here as your guest for the better part of a week, frankly. I'm also extremely thankful to the citizens of Fairbanks and Fort Wainwright who supported us throughout our stay at the hospital, including the radio station, I can't remember which station it was, that reminded folks of our presence here constantly. I'm thankful to those citizens who took the time to visit with us, some even bringing gifts and souvenirs, recognizing I wouldn't be souvenir shopping in Fairbanks anytime, and they were very kind to me. What amazing people when you need them. During my recovery here, I was cared for by the very best. A great team of medical experts looked after my mental as well as my physical well-being. And of course, I got to know all the doctors and nurses, I'm sure, in the Fort Wainwright Medical Center. To the point that when suddenly a doctor appeared one morning and was questioning me, and I thought, well, these are different questions. How am I feeling? Not in the way that all the other great doctors and nurses that treat me, but how was I feeling? And finally I realized you're not the kind of doctor I normally see here to find out how I can get back on my feet. He said, no, that's right, I'm a psychiatrist. He said, you want to feel how you feel? So I feel pretty good. I'd like to go home soon. That's how I feel. And he was there to prepare me, of course, because how was I returned to Canada? C-130, carrying all the gear that had been spilled on the crash site in the first place. And he wanted to know how I feel about going back. I'd say, well, whatever it takes, I'm happy to go back. But little moments like that stick in my mind. And of course, while I was here, people wanted to make sure that I felt welcome, that I was looked after. And for some reason or other, it was a particularly memorable moment when a day a Green Beret showed up. And somehow people had the impression that I was a unilingual francophone. And this Green Beret had been trotted out because he spoke French. And so he was in my recovery room with me, and he and I struggled together in French, my second language by a mile, and his second language as well. But nonetheless, we worked through and had a lot of fun as he kept me company, and a very personal, warm type of memory from my point of view. I was bid a moving farewell by the medical team at the hospital on the 6th of February as I left. So I lost all my own military clothing and equipment in the crash. And only one Canadian who had been sent up here had a uniform that I could fit into as sergeant. I was, of course, I had no cold weather gear, so I was provided very kindly with the United States Army cold weather parka, which I wore gratefully and with great pride. But what really stuck with me was the fact that as we were leaving, the medical team lined the hallway. A very special gesture. And I continue to recall that, as you can hear, with tremendous gratitude and humility. That sole act, to me, spoke volumes for the thoughtfulness and compassion of those who sought to help us here as we lay on the tarmac 30 years ago, just behind us. What a privilege it is for us to have such a great ally in the United States of America. A wonderful ally who reacts like family when it really counts. 30 years ago we arrived, trained, and I assure you, we were well trained for these operations, and excited at the prospect of training jointly with our friends and neighbors in the beautiful state of Alaska. Instead, we lost 9 fine soldiers, including my own Ops Sergeant, or Ops Master Corporal John McKinnon, who worked with me every single day in the previous year or so. In a small office, less than 100 square feet, with our telephone cords constantly entangled. He lost his life here that day. Warrant Officer Keith Arsenault, a very respected regimental physician's assistant, who had actually been working closely with me as I had to do some physiotherapy, recovering from a previous jump injury. He sat on my right. His shoulder was touching my right shoulder when we crash landed here. He did not survive. People like that, his widow, by the way, I had the great honor in 2016 to take her, escort her to the cenotaph in Canada on our Remembrance Day and lay a wreath in his honor in 2016. So, this is an incident that remains with me. Frankly, every morning when I get up, step up, and my right foot hits the floor. But as I said, instead of undergoing that great exercise, we landed here, lost those fine soldiers, suffered injuries, while attempting to land here at Fort Wainwright under very harsh conditions in order to participate in a joint exercise during Frost 89. So today, we're glad, Colonel Houghton and I, to be with America's Arctic warriors, and thankful to them for honoring the memory of those Canadians who perished and for ensuring their sacrifices and those of their loved ones have not been forgotten. But today is also an opportunity for us to recognize those who responded so gallantly to this emergency. Some people who are actually here today. I'm thankful to them. I know Canadians, we're all thankful to them for stepping up and doing that for us. I just say to you, we don't have any great lessons except that as I as I was temporarily incapacitated in the aircraft. Just for a couple seconds, but outside of that, vivid and had all the memories seared in my head in great detail. The thing that kicked in, of course, was my training. I knew what I had to do. I had to exit the aircraft, either 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock position. Even as I had to drag my right ankle behind me, and a few other things, that was the first reaction I had. I say, when I lay out there, and those first responders came, almost landed on me as they jumped over the banks that have been plowed along the runway. I had also tucked my fingers under my armpits to keep them from getting frostbite. We lost our gloves upon crashing. So the one lesson, trust your training, trust your instinct, show initiative. I would take from that. For that, I would say thank you for listening to me today. Thank you for having us up here today. And God bless you and best